And here we are live. So, hi there. My name is Jay Frost. And if you are new to this adventure, I'm the host of the Philanthropy Mastermind series brought to you by DonorSearch. And if you don't know anything about DonorSearch, unfortunately, you won't learn a lot about them today, except to say that they are a very generous company because since 2016, the Tedesco family and the DonorSearch family, the wider family, has been providing a platform to talk with leaders in the field of fundraising and philanthropy around the world. And we are certainly doing that today. So before I give that introduction, I not only want to welcome you to this conversation, but encourage you to take part today and every day we do this, which you can do by, of course, signing up to be on this list, sending me an email if you like. You can reach me through DonorSearch at j@donorsearch.net. Or finding me on LinkedIn or what have you. In addition, you can look for all the past sessions over at DonorSearch under the Resources tab. And while you're there, since I suspect you care about your donors as much as the two of us do, you can learn all about them through DonorSearch. You'll find that they have a marvelous array of services to really understand where they're coming from and what their needs and concerns are. And of course, that's a centerpiece for all we do, especially on Giving Tuesday. But today is not about Giving Tuesday. Today is about behavioral science and, of course, how it has changed at least one person's mind about fundraising. But I know you're going to learn a lot from this conversation with a man who has done so much in our field and contributed so much to understanding about what we do, and that is Bernard Ross. Thank you so much for being here, Bernard. Really appreciate having you.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Nice to see you. And welcome to the, oh goodness, we have almost 100 people online. Fantastic.
And
welcome to everyone there.
Yes, welcome everybody. And in fact, if you'd like to say that you're here and where you're coming in from, maybe what organization you work at, whatever you want, try to open up the chat and just let us know. We'd really appreciate that. Just say hello, and we'll be following that throughout. So the chat is your place to play. And then we also have Q&A. The Q&A is a perfect place to post questions so we won't lose sight of them in the conversation over in chat. So please do just chat away in the chat and then use the Q&A to post questions that Bernard can answer in the course of our discussion. And before we begin, Bernard, I want to give a little introduction for those who don't know your work. And this will be the briefest of introductions. I want to encourage you to look up more online, which you can do pretty easily. Just by looking up his name, but he is, of course, over at MC Consulting.
Jay, please don't make me blush here, okay? Please don't make me blush. And also, an injunction: not everything online is true. Some of it is the product of marketing, right? But
I promise nothing I'm saying is made up. So okay. you are, in addition to being a director of the agency. You've been speaking on stages throughout the world for a long time. In fact, it was difficult for us to connect because you've been in, I think, at least 5 different countries since we started talking. And you're the author of 8 books on a range of issues that range from psychology of influence to the role of decision science and social change. You can look for any of those books online pretty easily through Amazon or your preferred vendor, including the latest, which I think is Making the Ask, the Artful Science of High Value Fundraising, which we can talk about later if you want. He's worked with about every name organization you can think of that's on the international stage for social change and for bringing social good to the world: ICRC, Greenpeace, Amnesty International, UNICEF, MSF, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So with all of that, I want to just get the conversation underway. Bernard, you said when you suggested a topic that we could discuss this idea about wrong, wrong, wrong. And so that suggests there are 3 wrongs about with the work we do. What are they and why?
Oh, okay. I'm not going to read them all at once. I'm also going to fess up and say that, if only I had made 3 wrongs in my life, that'd be a blameless life. But I think, interestingly, like you being reasonably successful at what I did for some years, when I discovered a body of work called decision science, behavioral science, it really made me rethink some of the things that I believed or thought, and made me challenge them, and either say, actually, that isn't true. It's just that it suits me to believe that that's true. And secondly, it made me understand the reason why something which was true was the case, it didn't have the explanation I thought it had. there was a correlation, but there wasn't causation, if that distinction makes sense. So yes, it was true that if you did that, that thing happened, but the two weren't causally related. There was a correlation, which is a big problem when we come to the more serious, rigorous study of what works or what doesn't work. Anyway, that's if you want me to tell you about the first one, I can reveal that to you if you like.
Please,
okay,
yes.
so must be 12 years ago now. I was in New York, and actually I'm coming to New York tomorrow.
What? Oh.
Yeah, I'm coming to New York tomorrow to work with Human Rights Watch.
You're speaking.
I'm doing the. This sounds grander than it is. I'm doing the global strategy for Human Rights Watch, and we did a thing in Geneva a couple of weeks ago, and I'm flying to New York tomorrow. I'm working with her. Anyway, so they only want to double their income. They only want to go from 100 million to 200 million. So no pressure there. So anyway, about 12 years ago, I was doing some work in New York, and I'd been flown out there by one of the big face-to-face fundraising agencies doing, doing, in England, we sometimes call it chugging, but literally stopping people in the street saying, would you like a donation? And I know that, oh, here's an extra wrong. When I first heard about it, I said, why would anyone stop in the street? That's madness. What, you go up, a stranger comes up in the street with a proposition to help a charity. You're on your way somewhere. They've got a little cash machine. Why would you? I mean, unless they had a gun or were holding your partner hostage, why would you give them your financial detail? Like, it seems to be completely counterintuitive. But anyway, interestingly, of course, it does work, and it is, to this day, to this hour, the single most effective low to mid-value donor recruitment technique there is. All the bit, UNICEF, Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, UNHCR, all use that technique because it just works, But anyway, so I was teaching people techniques in how to build rapport, and I showed, they had brought together about 30 really smart young people, those young people that are so effective on the street that you and I used to be, Jay, those, young people we used to be. Anyway, so it goes. And I was teaching them psychological techniques to, how to stop people, how to attract people's attention, how to engage them, how to talk about them, blah, blah, blah. And we then split. I was there for a week, and we did some training and went out and practiced, came back. And there were about 6 teams working throughout the city. And I was looking at the results, seeing whether what I'd been training was working. And I saw that one team was doing exceptionally well. And I thought, well, goodness, I don't understand why they're not the brightest of my group. They're not the most thinking. So what are they doing? Except from, one of the more able groups was, I mean more people were signing up and they were getting higher value donations. So I thought, I have to go and study this group and see what it is they're doing, because they must be doing something different from what I'm teaching them. So I watched them. I've actually got a picture of this, which I can send you later, and I noticed what they were doing is they were standing next to the 21st Street subway station in New York. And they were standing beside a sign where the words 21st were just very big. And what I noticed was that when they were asking for gifts, people would kind of look around and many of them would actually notice the word 21st Street. And what came back from the data when I looked at the data was that at that time, the average gift on a monthly sign up was $15 to $16. Okay, I mean, this is 12 years ago. They were getting $17, $18, $19. And what became clear to me was that in some alchemical, mystical, magical way, being next to a very big number, because the subway sign is very big and they're standing next to it, was having an impact on people's choices. I should say that I went back to New York 3 years ago, just before the pandemic, and repeated the experiment, this time at 41st Street, and found the same movement, the same movement. Not a huge, not a massive difference. I mean, it's $3 or $4 extra, but $3 or $4 extra. And I thought, that doesn't make any sense to me. That doesn't make any sense, because the number 21 had no relevance and nobody was mentioning the number 21. It was just there in people's visual cortex. So then I read a fantastic book by a guy called Daniel Kahneman called Thinking Fast and Slow. Kahneman won the Nobel Prize for, you probably know this, won the Nobel Prize for economics. He is not an economist. Imagine how pissed off, that's English pissed off, meaning angry, the world's economists were that a psychologist won the premier prize for economics. And what he said was, is that essentially he said, people are not rational when they make choices, and they will take, if they're not sure what to do, they'll look for a piece of data, any piece of data which will help them frame their decision. And so what was happening, and I now know that we can call it an anchor, or Cialdini, Bob Cialdini, you may have heard of him, wrote a fantastic book called Influence, talks about persuasion, which is the idea that when people are not sure what the right answer is, they look for a cue, and they will take their cue from whatever is kind of most relevant or in the field of vision. And you see hypnotists do this, hypnotists do this with like little audio cues or whatever. So, and I was thinking, that's amazing. This kind of hypnosis happening. Now, what's interesting is, sorry, I'm slightly ranting here, but is it's not that people are random. This is not that people are making random choices. These are irrational choices, and that different, and that people are. I read a subsequent book by a guy called Dan Ariely, which is that people are, interesting phrase, predictably irrational. Predictably irrational. And what I've found in my work in those 12 years since then is that by giving people some of these psychological cues, and there's a hugely interesting question, Jay, about the ethics of that. Are you manipulating people? If you have a boring case for support, is that more ethical than an interesting one? Can you cue people in ways which will encourage them to consider making a differently sized gift, or to be more amenable to making a gift? And the answer is yes. And I think I've now written 3 books drawing on the work of Daniel Kahneman, drawing on a couple of other people who won the Nobel Prize that we can talk about, which I think reinforce that view. My first wrong, which is that people are rational, and we think we think we ourselves are rational. And when I look at the big, who you get married to or who you fall in love with, not always the same thing. Your job, the city you end up living in, whether you give money to the orphan puppies or the hospice, in any given moment, we behave by and large irrationally, but not randomly. And my question to you, I suppose, as people listening, is our job as fundraisers to give people the most effective stimulus, which may not be a rational stimulus. That's the point I'm coming to. So wrong was, people are rational, and my job was to explain to them rationally why they should care about the poor, the dispossessed, the victims of gender-based violence, all that stuff we care about. I should try and persuade them to do it rationally. And what I came to was, you should begin with their irrationality, and then there's a journey. But the starting point is irrational.
There's so much to unwrap in there. Do you mind if I ask you a couple quick ones? I don't want to take
absolutely. Okay. Please do.
So one is this idea about the visual clue. It's in their field of vision, 21st Street, 41st Street, 42nd Street. So you can see that, and that may at least give them a reference point for a conversation about money after you've talked about these other things. And so my question is twofold. First of all, when you've done that experiment in places that had a visual cue, and then when you've done it in places that didn't have one, did it influence not just the amounts, but did it influence whether or not they gave?
No, that's a different thing. And it's important to know you can use different triggers. The word we very often use is heuristics. Heuristics, there are something like, in this body of work, there are something like 140 heuristics, meaning little biases. I can show you a bias straight away, for example. If you or anyone listening wants to put your finger up, just put your finger up in the air. Jay, can you do that? Not in a rude way, just a middle, okay? And I want you to hold it in front of your eyes, and look at a straight line somewhere in your room. And if people watching online could do that, and keep both your eyes open and try and block out the straight line with your finger, keeping both your eyes open, and then close your left eye and close your right eye, and you'll find that your finger jumps.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So all that tells you is, and lots of people don't know that, you have a bias. What one of your eyes is stronger than the other eye. You know that one of your hands is normally, or one of your feet. But very few people are aware of that bias with their eyes. And the point about these biases is that people are not aware of them. You know, they are there, and there are. Although I'm saying there are 145, there are probably 8 to 10 of them which are important in fundraising. And the bias we're dealing with is, but what this doesn't do, what this technology or this body of work doesn't do, is to persuade people to do something they want to do, and that, you know, that's also the basis. It's not really connected to hypnotism, but you know, hypnotists can't hypnotize you to go and murder someone. That does, you know, you have to do something that you would rather. So the question of how you, you know, there's a different technique to persuade people to become more philanthropic. That's a different thing. We can talk about that. But this is about changing the gift. Give you a couple other examples if it's useful. So, for example, we just helped a very large UK university, you can probably guess what that is, to get a gift for £8,888,888.88. Now, any of your audience, you know, why on earth did you, what's the business with each? You normally have, you know, £5, £10, £1,000, £1 million, £10 million. Of course, a very Western way of thinking about things. I don't know if you want to guess, Jay, or if anyone on the chat wants to guess what the cultural background of someone who gave a gift for £8,888,888.88 was.
Let's see. Oh,
exactly, Joe. Well done, Joe. The prize goes to you. So that's 8 is the luckiest number in Asian and especially in Chinese culture. So all I was doing was saying, you know what, guys, you're trying to raise money from people with a Chinese background. Why don't you use a number which relates to their? Because, you know, that guy he was prepared to make I mean, he wasn't, by writing a check, he wasn't expecting good luck, but he was expecting to say, if I write a check for that amount, I gain some. That's not a very irrational thing. I'm pretty sure the numbers don't have any.
Right.
I have a friend, really good friend, and I wasn't involved in this one. She worked for the Royal Opera House in the UK. Mm-hmm. Big prestigious, you know, organization. And she was we've got one of my other discoveries is about number ordering, you know, in a ask string. So she discovered that when she put the number 18 in as a gift, so the gift levels were something like £4, £7, £12, £18, she got a significant number of gifts in 18. And she couldn't understand why until one person wrote to her and said, the number 18 in the Jewish faith, in the Jewish culture, translates. I don't quite understand how it works, but you know, all of the numbers, all of the letters in the alphabet have a number. Mm-hmm. And 18 stands, again, I'm sure somebody can maybe guess, connects to philanthropy in general. Yeah, for life. There you go. Amy's got right. Amy's okay with gift. Okay, $18. So, and I was going, you know, how stupid am I saying do ask strings 5, 10, 15, blah, blah, blah. Understand that numbers mean different things to different people. You know, how can you and I make a living out of stuff as simple as this? How can I charge enormous amounts of money to tell people things which are so catatonically simple? You know, there's an example that brought home to me the importance of numbers in queuing, you know, an 8, an 18, standing next to the right. Now, using your 50th anniversary, not just as a help us in our 50th anniversary, but using the 50th anniversary or the 25th anniversary as a cue for the right number to make a gift. Yes. So there's my first admission of abject failure. And
wow. And I do have one thing which you can answer later maybe, but that's whether or not if you supply these cues verbally as well as visually, if it has the same impact, because in feasibility studies, which we've all done, we're often offering a figure and it's related to, let's say, what we think the person can give.
Yeah.
or what it is we want, but it's not necessarily informed by the kinds of things that you're saying. So first of all, is it important to provide those kind of verbal cues as well, and do they work as well as visual cues?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think there's an interesting thing about, I think it's a different set of techniques and technologies when you're in that one-to-one. I mean, this is much more about mass.
Okay.
Well, you can work across mass, you know,
Sure.
but you can have cues. We did a nice thing with schools. It's called Shakespeare Schools. They basically engage young people in theatre as a way of self-expression, and the donors were going to a show in a theatre. So in the theatre there were two. You go left or you go right to get to your seats, and we put down one wall of the theatre stories. Little Jimmy saying, I gained confidence through what I'm doing, and I love to see the Shakespeare class. And then the other side, we put numbers to test the difference between, and the numbers were things like we've helped 20, kids confidence improved 25%, blah, blah, blah. So that was an interesting little test about the difference between which of those. Now, in that case, for example, interestingly, the stories had a much more powerful impact than the numbers.
Yeah, numbers.
So
What's the statistics tell and stories sell? The old line, yes.
Oh, that's a nice. I hadn't had that one. I was now claiming that for my own.
Wow. No,
Anyway, okay.
and I didn't mean to stop you. So that was the first wrong. What's the second?
Okay, it's going to make me that like my career is falling apart here, Gray. So the first one was about people are rational and they're not, or not in this field. Okay, my second one is about salience and about. This time I was at a conference run by a well-known international fundraising organization, AFP. That's where I was, and I sat at the back of the room watching a very, very smart woman whom I respect and admire. And she said, "Now, when you share your case for support, so we're now talking about those one-to-one interactions, people will only remember 40% of what you said." And I said, "Goodness, I'd love people to remember 40% of what they said." I don't think the numbers remotely. People aren't paying attention most of the time. They're in their own heads. They're thinking about stuff. They're thinking about the call they've got after you've got, when you've gone, or what they're going to have for dinner or something like that. And I actually did a little experiment. I'm happy to do it again if we're in the world of experiments, to say, okay, please. What support? So I would like you, Jay. Okay.
Okay.
I would like you to show me that you know the words and actions to the famous ABBA song YMCA. Okay, you ready? 1, 2, 3. It's fun to be at the YMCA.
Yes, but we had that at our wedding, so I have it.
Okay. Here. So you remember, and I'm sure if I asked people again listening to do YMCA, they do that. Okay. Now I'm going to ask you a more difficult question, which is, do you have a passport, Jay?
Yes.
Do you know your passport number?
Oh, no.
Okay, so I want you to imagine you are trying to re-enter the United States and you have lost your passport. And the very nice man from Homeland Security says, "Jay, do you have any evidence of who you are?" And you say, "Well, I know all the words to YMCA and indeed the actions." And you wave YMCA, and the man from welcome, Jay. Now, so what I'm saying to you is, one of those pieces of information is really useful and important in your life, and one of them is meaningless. Jay, this is a song from 50 years ago, man. Why are you remembering the words to YMCA? So my point is that we remember stuff. We remember very little. We generally don't remember things that are important. I'm sure, again, if we ask people, do people remember the words to songs from their childhood, or like meaningless? And we very often forget really important, like our partner's birthdays or whatever. So how do you make? So my question is really, how do you make things salient? And I guess my second learning is partly not just about how little people remember, but I'm going to say we overshare. We give people too much information. Now, I'm not saying I had a really interesting learning about, I tried to move away from doing written cases for support. I said, well, no reason to that. We could do it on an iPad, we can make it, and you can click it and it does amazing cool things, and you can click it. And what I discovered was that those interactive ones, which people said they wanted, didn't work as well as giving people, a pretty solid thing printed. And so two things. One is that people like to get a very solid case for support printed on nice paper, well designed, and then on the back you need to say, this was not paid for by the cause, this was paid for by a donor or a print, so people aren't worried you're spending money on fancy pants paper in case for support. But people will physically touch paper and weigh it, and will form a judgment about the value of your proposition based on that. Now, again, I know from some of the work I've done elsewhere, if you go into a fancy restaurant, they print the menu on heavier paper. If you go into a fancy restaurant, the knives and forks are heavier, the spoons are heavier. So we form kinesthesia. So we're back to your interesting thing about, is this just about visual cues? Those are called kinesthetic cues. We gain cues from touch and feel. So we do that, and then you need to find a way of not just, so people like to get a substantial, I'm going to say substantial rather than heavy, but then you also need to find a way of making your case salient. And by salient, I mean one very simple way of framing what you're doing that will stick with people, because they don't remember 40% of what you do, of what you say, they remember 1 or 2%. And you need to be very, very clear about what's the 1 or 2% you want people to remember, and encapsulate it in a way that makes it, and the word is salient. Salient meaning it has impact and reference, and the person can remember it and repeat it back. And I've just spent a whole, let me give you an example. I spent a whole day with a fantastic organisation in the UK called the Trussell Trust. And they are responsible for organising many of the food banks in the UK. I'm ashamed to admit that I live in the fifth, I think we're now the sixth. We slightly went down after Mrs. Truss was the Prime Minister. I think we're the sixth richest country. We're still the sixth richest country in the world. I'm ashamed at how many people in this country go to food banks, and do my best to make that, as I know you do, this. But so we're working, and I was talking to these people and saying, what are the stats? And the stats were 4 million people in the UK used a food bank last week. And I said, what does that mean? I have no idea. What does the number 4 million mean? I have no frame of reference that, is that bigger than the city I live in? How do we make that salient? Those kinds of numbers, or, how do you make people who are like me, probably like you, who are relatively well off, understand what it's like when you go to the fridge and you open the fridge and there's nothing in the fridge, or there's a can of beans in the fridge? How do you understand what that's actually like? So we worked on that, and we spent a whole day. Again, how do I manage to charge this amount of money for doing these simple things? And we came away with a figure I'm going to get, with a phrasing, a salient phrasing I'm going to give you, which you will now remember, and you will repeat at dinner tonight or tomorrow at lunchtime, because it's designed to be memorable. And that item is, there are now more food banks in the UK than there are branches of McDonald's. Now, of course, because one of the problems with food banks is they're tucked away in churches and community halls. People don't see, but they see McDonald's all the time. So part of the point is that every time you see a McDonald's now, you'll go, oh my goodness. And you will remember, and that's almost the only thing you have to remember is that. So, we spent the day from 9 till 5 o'clock. We got through a lot of stuff. And then that's the one that has had resonance. We came up with something, but that's the one that's had resonance, had salience. So the idea of how do you make your case for support, or your proposition, whatever you want to call it, so memorable for people, so memorable for people that they almost can't forget it, and they also get clues. The beautiful thing about more branches of McDonald's than there are food banks and
Right.
branches of McDonald's, is that you're looking for external clues. So when people are out and about, they see things which trigger that cue.
Right.
Anyway, so it's second long admission of failure, but well, I suppose I just thought that people read this stuff, and you spend ages using Oxford commas and trying to avoid gerunds and shortening
I have
sentences
to
and
ask
all
you
that
one
stuff.
thing. I'm sure that you've gotten pushback from some people about the technology. I'm not one of those people. But do you see significant differences in how people respond to digital versus print media when it comes to the case?
Yeah, and I think we're doing. Yes, there are significant differences. Some of that's about their preferred channel of communication. Some of it's about what you're trying to, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to engage people? Are you trying to move them on from first gift to second gift? What are you trying to do here? And there's absolutely a case. Interesting. I always think it's kind of an Occam's razor thing. How simple can you make this? I mean, to me, the key is how simple can you make your proposition? And I mean, I've got a beautiful example from Doctors Without Borders, who are using this, I think, this technology or these approaches more than anyone else. I've been doing some work with a fantastic guy called Thomas Kurman, who was until recently the director of fundraising at Doctors Without Borders in the States. I mean, doing amazing online gift gaining. If I can shamelessly mention another book, you very kindly mentioned my previous book. Let me see if I can get another book to show you.
Now that's
Sorry.
magic. You disappeared and reappeared into your
I
bookshelf.
disappeared.
It was
Well,
a
okay.
bit Harry
So
Potter.
this is
Yes.
okay, right. This is a book called Change for Better, which
Yes.
is a series of. I'm not selling the book. I mean, of course, I'm selling the books, but I'm not selling them. If you know what I mean. Series of 20 case studies worldwide. One of which is a fantastic study by Thomas Kurman, looking at what he did with looking at online giving and testing. All of this, I mean, this makes it sound like I can kind of predict what people will do. And one of the key things is you are all the time, as in any business, testing these things. And so we're testing one thing against another thing. And Thomas did some really interesting series of 5 tests to explore what was the most effective online proposition. Another example, which we kind of mentioned earlier, was the difference between the serial order of your ask string. And the fact that we tend to go 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, other blah, 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 and turning that around and beginning with the larger number.
Right.
Not all the time, and there are other things you have to do as well, but by doing that, you will in general get a slightly higher gift by reversing the ask string. And we've done that in the US with Doctors Without Borders. We've just done it with English National Opera, which is another opera company in the UK. So I've been working with, kind of very high level donors, the opera people, and I don't want to say low level, but people from a more humanitarian spirit.
I have to ask you one more question on this one.
Yeah.
I've heard, especially doing this series, people talking about testing to failure, which some successful businesses have done. You don't just do this dual or triple testing, but you're also testing to see how far you can go before the test fails. Do you also believe that there's a value in that with some of these tests?
I
Too
kind of
high,
want to
too
say
low, too many
probably.
words, too few words, pictures, no pictures?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, I guess the question is, I mean, the lure of the experiment,
Right.
the lure of the experiment, it's got, go towards the light, and there's always an issue here about how much should you test. If a test fails utterly, do you have a moral? Have you failed in some way there? I mean, there's an interesting thing about the difference between testing online, where you're talking about tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of potential donors, and so if you do a split, it doesn't really make a big difference. You know, you probably versus a lot of what I do now is coaching CEOs or whatever which is what the Making the Ask book is about going into a room with one person and making an ask. Now, that's a bit like you got into the Olympic final. So you're in a room with someone you know can make a gift of 5 million, 10 million, 20 million, whatever million dollars. If you're not nervous in that room, you're not alive. You should be nervous. But so you don't want to say, oh, well, if I mess up on that test, can I test? You may not be long for this mortal coil. So, I mean, in that case, I think you're always looking at saying, how, you know, what can we do that is, I don't want to say safe, but like is within bounded, you know, what's the bounded reality here? What's the, you know, what's possible? I like things like the, you know, using 8, you know, in the giving for the Chinese community. That was a no-brainer. I mean, it was kind of, now the fact that they then got an 8,880,000, blah blah blah, that was a win. I mean, nobody imagined that, you know, that wasn't imagined, but it was, somebody clearly picked up on the idea they could write a check with 8s in it, and that was what that was another interesting thing. The donor in question wanted to write those numbers. You know, and now you're saying that's who writes checks? I mean, are we living in the 19th century? He wanted to write that check and sign it. I mean, how interesting, how unrational is that for a man who spent his whole, I don't want to be indiscreet, but, you know, he spent most of the rest of his life doing trades and that kind of nonsense that I don't understand in the stock market. You know, like, what does that even mean, that thing you just said about crypto? I have no idea. But he wanted to write this old school check and hand it over. The viscerality of that was quite interesting.
Okay, so I took you on a departure again. I love these stories. So that's the second wrong. What's the third wrong?
Well, Lisa, I'm just aware that are there any? I'm just aware that I'm not giving people a chance to ask any. I'm happy to. I mean, I'm happy to do that, or if people have a question, I'm happy to hear what the.
Absolutely,
and I do feel my career slipping away here in terms of why has Jay invited this guy who's clearly a complete failure to do.
Well, we don't see any other questions, but people are sticking with us. But if you do have a question out there, please do post it. And maybe one of the other things that we can do, Bernard, is how can people reach you after this? So if somebody does disappear from our ranks before you're complete,
I'll put my email in the
chat. And then I'll take the liberty of reading it if I may, so that those who see the recording later and don't see the chat will share that through the audio.
Yeah, so that's me. So it's called a vanity URL, MC Consulting. Just okay. So there's not a com or whatever. That's the.
That's funny. I don't see it there.
Because I haven't posted it. Because there's how competent I am. That's how competent I am.
So for those watching the recording, it's Bernard Ross. It's BERNERDROSS at mc.consulting.
mc.consulting, yeah. And I also promised Jay, I think, that I would send you some materials to share with it, because I'm very excited by lots of this stuff. And also to say, while sharing it, so all of the money from this book goes to Doctors Without Borders. Everyone who buys the other book you mentioned,
right, the Making the Ask book.
Making the Ask, you are buying a vaccine. We're originally we were doing COVID vaccines, and now we're doing vaccines. So if you buy the book, you are literally buying a vaccine. You know, well, I mean, what I mean is, I will pay for a vaccine for every, and we've bought like 1,000 vaccines, just over 1,000 vaccines.
Wow, so far. That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
No, it's good. Well, I just think we're all in the business of, you don't make any money out of books. I mean, unless you write Harry Potter or something like that. You know?
That's right. Oh, we do have a question. So let me share that with you from Sarah, who said, in an increasingly virtual world where people only donate via online and we only have their email address, how can we translate your advice about tangible feel to our materials?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think probably you can't in that sense. I mean, you then have to look about how do you make things salient, differently salient. So for example, and again, I'll send you some stuff about that. One example is, I hate web designers. I mean, there's a range of people I hate, but web designers I hate most of all, because web designers like everything to look neat and nice. So one of the things I know is that if you're looking to get people to make a gift on an online donation page, aside from organizing their ask string in a different way, is make your donate button a different color, which is off your color scheme. So if you have a web page that's, you know, pastel green and pastel blue and pastel orange, your web designer will want to make your donate button in that color scheme. Take it off that color scheme and do it in bright orange or something, and it will become more salient then. I mean, that's a very simple thing. There's a nice, and again, I'll send you some stuff about this. There's a nice little acronym we use called MindSpace, which is, so MindSpace stands for messenger. Who should your messenger be? Who should, you know, should it be the chief executive, or you know, a field operative, or a donor, or a survivor, or whatever? Incentive, what incentive should you offer? And the incentive could be your money, you know, Giving Tuesday, your money will be matched today. You know, that's an incentive, you know, or you can save a life today, that's an incentive. N stands for norming. Other people are giving now. You are one of 10, you know. So there's no point going through the whole thing there, but, you know, MindSpace is a little mnemonic which takes you through a whole series of things you can think about, which will consider in your messaging, all of which apply, I think, online. You know, even if it's just how you do an email. There's lots of great stuff about emails. I mean, I you know, some other people you must have some people you admire in the kind of, you know, Tom, goodness, how embarrassing, I forgot.
The people at Next After have done a lot of work on that too, who have been here.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting. You know, but speaking of that, about who you recommend, Emily had asked earlier, you know, pointing out that there's a lot of books written by a lot of people. But when you're thinking about the sources that you've found to be particularly relevant and meaningful, the people that you trust, how do you determine that? Besides receiving a Nobel Prize, how are you validating the work of?
Well, geez, okay, you know, no, I mean, you need to be careful about any kind of prize. I mean, what's his name? The guy who did the dreadful thing with dogs. What was he called? Russian psychologist.
Oh, Pavlov.
Pavlov. He won. Do you know he won the Nobel Prize for that?
Wow.
A horrible experiment. Anyway, so I mean, so what's interesting is Kahneman won the Nobel Prize,
Yes.
and then a guy called Richard Thaler won it probably 4 years ago now, a follow-up prize for the same broad body of work, which is he wrote a fantastic book called Nudge, which is about some of the more. So Kahneman's book is a very robust piece of thing. You know, it's a very robust piece of work. In fact, it's one of those books that lots of people have bought and hardly anyone has read. It's the classic. You know, it's a thick academic work. A fantastic woman called Esther Duflo, just the year before last, also won the Nobel Prize for the same body of work in decision science, and along with a couple of, and she's the youngest. I think she's the only woman to win the Nobel Prize for economics, and one of the youngest Nobel laureates ever. So, I mean, I'm kind of saying over a period of 20 years, this is a body of work that, you know, is pretty solid. Right. I mean, I'm going to offend almost everyone now. Emily's pointed out a thing about bad pop psycho there. Absolutely. I mean, I think I watch the number go down when I say this. Watch the number. Myers-Briggs is nonsense. Myers-Briggs is complete pop psychology. People are going to leave now. It has no more intellectual credence or whatever than astrology or, you know, Shakespearean humor. It's really, and I hear people at conferences.
Maybe just to fire back.
I think people are just going off to make a cup of tea. But I mean, I hate hearing about that because I kind of want to say, and I hear a lot of things about that, people doing influence. I say, of course it makes sense. Just because it makes sense doesn't mean that it's true. It's just we like simple things, and lots of the stuff I'm talking about here is not simple. I'm giving you simple examples of how it's been used. But I mean, for example, I just finished last week a 6-month study with the largest museum service in the UK, testing a number of these different experiments to say, what would encourage people. Museums in the UK, by and large, are free. So it's quite a big barrier to moving from it's free, why do you want me to pay? So we tested a number of different propositions, a number of techniques, drawn from this work to see what works. So, that's a pretty big piece of work, 6 months testing things. I'm about to go to India in January and do some work there. India's a big place, working on online work with UNICEF, looking at testing different things. I mean, there's no, and I don't know if I mentioned this book. I mean, these are 20 experiments from all over the world. They're not, and all due respect to your country, which I love, I mean, lots of this stuff comes out of the States. Now, going to the States is a big place, but it's not the only place where philanthropy happens. It happens in Asia, it happens in India, it happens in the UK, it happens in Egypt. And what's interesting to me is the things which are different culturally, whether that's the eats or whatever, and the things which are the same. And of course, the things which are same are more to do with our neurology. We've talked a lot about, at the moment we've been speaking quite a lot in this discussion about the body of work, and I'm going to kind of draw a Venn diagram here. One body of work which is about what's very often called behavioural science, which is essentially the nudge, the little cues you give people which encourage them to do things. There's another body of work which connects this called evolutionary psychology. Those things that we have hardwired into us, as we all walked out of Ethiopia, as we all did 200,000 years ago, we looked over on the left-hand side of the savannah, and we saw something and said, "Oh, is that a snake or is it a stick?" And one of the things we learned, and it's hardwired into us now, is that if it's a snake, I'm not going to go near it because that's dangerous. And if it's a stick, that would be quite good, but actually there's plenty of other sticks. And from that has come one of the things we know about now in fundraising, which is we have a hardwired bias against taking risks. Most of us, apart from Elon Musk, who may be a little left field for most of us, he likes taking risks. But for most people, security, not taking risks, is a big thing. And of course, that's important in fundraising because that's why your brand's important. It's why your score on Charity Monitor. What's the thing you have in the States? It's called charity. We get a charity score. You mean the USA or?
Yeah. No, I mean the thing where you get ranked. Your organization gets ranked on how.
Anyway, yes, like
Charity Navigator.
Is one of them. Yes.
So things like that. So making people feel secure, and that connects a piece of psychology from Hertzberg, you might be familiar with Hertzberg, which is about hygiene factors kick in before motivators. We spend a lot of time in fundraising talking about motivators and make people feel secure. You see that in business, money back guarantee, 100% success rate, as used by 1,000 other people. Those are the things. So that hardwired evolutionary psychology thing is about how do we make people feel secure? Because when I ask you to give me money, Jay, I'm asking you to take a risk with me and with my cause.
I have to ask you about something, trying to tie together that with a question that had come in from Joe earlier, and I'm going to adapt it a bit, Joe. I'm going to take the liberty of doing that, which is to ask if you see a difference in all these things between genders when it comes to how people receive information, interpret information, act on information.
I'm going to say yes. I can see a difference. Do I know what the difference is? No. That's the safest answer you could give, and
it's
that's
the
no.
safest. I think one thing I do notice, and so I'm going to talk to Human Rights Watch about this tomorrow. We've done a lot of work with the Red Cross. We have a fantastically successful proposition called the Tiffany Circle, which is a giving circle for women. And I have seen, this is not, I don't mean to just, this is not ladies who lunch. This is not,
This is Melanie Sablehouse's baby. Yep.
Yeah. Now, we helped them take that out of the US, where we weren't involved in the US. We helped them roll that into Britain, and they've now rolled it across Europe. Hugely successful, and a completely different dynamic and mechanic, about saying, and not about just feminist. It's not just about girls' education or about feminine hygiene product. I mean, not just talking about inverted commas women's issues, whatever those are, but talking about what do women do that's different from that alpha male type guy. It's like when you sometimes you feel like you're in a bear pit when you're in one of those big high value donor meetings, when people you feel embarrassed for your gender, or I do anyway. So that's so interesting to me, that women are different in that sense. And that's an interesting thing, which I think we're seeing more of. There must be some interesting stuff. Gee, I don't want to get political, which of course means I'm about to get political. But I mean, in the US, looking at from a distance, how the issue of reproductive rights clearly had an impact on the way people voted. Look at some of how do people vote in states? Whether you agree or disagree with that, that's not the political point.
And giving both philanthropically and politically this year, yes.
And women were making a choice there. Women on, if you want to call it either side of that debate, were clearly making choices about, I feel strongly about this.
Yeah. Now, what I realize is that as we get through this, we've had other additional questions, which are terrific, but also we've never let you get to the third wrong. So I don't know if you can give the shortest version of the third wrong, so we can.
Oh goodness! Okay. Can I get to it? I guess. Let me send you some stuff about that. It's a slightly more. It involves a longer case study. Let me just say one.
Is this an excuse to have you come back at some point?
No.
I mean, is this my excuse for trying to get you?
Oh, I see. I'd love to do that. Well, this has been such an interesting conversation, because normally speaking, you have to do a whole presentation, and this has been so interesting to talk. Well, so an interesting thing connects to. Let me give you an idea. I think we are donor drug dealers, or if you like to call us, we are philanthropic pharmacists is a slightly classier version of that. So I think there are 4 chemicals. This is the neuroscience. So I made my little diagram, which was behavioral economics, evolutionary psychology, and there's a third diagram which is about the neuroscience. And such interesting stuff come out about the chemicals that unlock in our brains as we do that. And there are 4 key chemicals that the stimuli we give people, you can actually track it. One is dopamine, second one is oxytocin, serotonin, and I forgot what the last one is now. Endorphins. Let's deal with oxytocin. Oxytocin is the one that it's called the empathy drug, and we produce this drug. And we actually, if we're breastfed by our mothers, you get it from mother's milk. As we look at each other, as 2 people look at each other, the eye exchange produces a response of oxytocin. And that's why lots of Disney characters have huge eyes. It's part of the power of Disney. And using how do we create what messages, what images do we use that can help produce that oxytocin in people? Because that's the thing which stimulates a sense of empathy, that sense of, and that's so important to me. And, I'm not like them. There are 4 million people starving in Yemen. Where is Yemen? I couldn't, I think I couldn't put Yemen on a map. I think it's in Africa. I don't, is it? I don't, what does 4 million mean? How do you create empathy, which is a thing that hugely interests me, for people who are not like us? The different gender, different sexuality, different belief system. We can't just care about people who are like us. And so that, how do we, there's a front end to that story, to which the answer is, become a philanthropic pharmacist. And I don't know if I mentioned my book earlier about making me ask that, and I'll send you a thing about, there's a little clue about how to give people cues to consciously try and stimulate each of those drugs: dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins, and they take part in different parts of the donor journey. You can see why I don't get asked out to dinner very much. I'm a very but Bernard, are you trying to convince us to do something here?
So, Bernard, is the material you sent, is that something that I can share with the people who've been
please,
here?
No, I'd love it. This
Okay,
stuff is, I mean, I'm proud to have written a few books. I stand on the shoulders of giants. I mean, there's people who've done some amazing things. I'm not trying to sell. I'm not trying to sell decision science. That's not the whole thing. It's just, it's a body of work which I say has brought me to thinking, is that true? Do I really know that? Does it really work? And trying to move beyond.
And why is this?
What I see
and why is this important to you? I just have to ask that question because, you've been talking about the hows of all this and helping us to really understand this, but there's something that's motivating you to do this work, to write all these books, to focus on these things that awaken empathy. Why?
I'm going to say, well, I really feel like a failure most days, Jay. I wish, despite the very nice thing you gave me, and yes, I do work on these amazing pieces of work. I get, I'm going to New York tomorrow. I'm going to India in January. I'm going to Mexico. It's not enough, Jay. It's not enough, man. It's not enough. The world is in some ways getting better, but when I watch the news when I switch on the TV news at night, I struggle to watch the end of the news when I see what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in Yemen, what's happening to people in the UK, what's happening to women in the US, what's happening to girls in Afghanistan. I kind of think, God, we need to do so much better. I mean, not by a little. That's why I'm loving working with Human Rights Watch, because they're saying $100 million, which is our current turnover, is not remotely enough to tackle the human rights challenges we have in the world. We need to be and I kind of want to say $200 million isn't enough either. And again, if I can be political just before I go, and we're about to lose some audience, Harvard doesn't need the money, man. Harvard could pay for every student in the US to go to university. It's just a money-making machine. I'm not knocking Harvard as such. I'm just saying the good causes don't always get the money. And you and my job is to make sure that the causes really need the money. That's what's driving me. And we have to use the best technology, the best ideas, the most effective one to make that happen. That's end of rant.
Thank you.
Rant part one.
Well, end of this rant, because if I can somehow convince you to come back, I know there's a lot more that you can share, including that third wrong. But I also want to ask you about listening to donors, but I'm going to save that for another time because you've written about that. And I know that's been controversial, but I know that you have a lot of insight into that. It's so important.
Cool.
Thank you so much for this, Bernard.
No, thank you.
Really,
My pleasure.
really
and thank you to everyone who stayed with it. I think, interestingly, Harvard's the thing that broke the back of the...
Our friends at Harvard are probably
Harvard alumni.
A bit too.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. But a pleasure to see you, and thanks so much for the chance to do this. And thank you for your great work, Jay. I mean, I was honored to be asked by you, so it's a pleasure even to share a screen with you. There we go.
Oh, that's very kind of you. The honor is definitely ours. So grateful to you for everything that you do. We did share your email address earlier. We'll make sure to include it in the notes for the recording. This recording, for those of you who asked. Yes.
And I'll send you a bundle of stuff that you can share however you want on your website, whatever you want to. Cool.
Right. And this recording will be posted over on YouTube, but there will be a link on the DonorSearch page, again, at donorsearch.net, where you can learn all about, of course, your donors, but you can also see everything in the Mastermind series that will be there the next couple of days.
Great. So, listen, thank you. And nice to speak to you, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you so much, Bernard. Thank you to all of you for being here. Stay healthy
thank
out
you, everyone,
there. And hopefully we'll see you all on Thursday. We have another great session coming up. If you don't know about it, check either your email or check on the DonorSearch site. So until then, take care.
Thanks again. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.